So we're now being recorded. Hands off, hands on, hand holding. Yeah, definitely the difference between being hands off and allowing someone to just run, hands on and actually being a bit overly bearing, perhaps a bit controlling and micromanaging, and then actually hand holding when you need to be there to help the person along. Yeah, it's definitely no longer command and control. Absolutely picking up that point that Edson made. What else? We covered so many things. What else do we cover? It was 24 hours ago. Making sure that people smile when you enter the room, not when you leave. Very good, Gonza. Thank you for that. That made everybody smile. I can see on the group chat. Okay, so I think there's a good breadth between the three different groups of the things one manager does, and that was a very busy list of all the things we have to do, but really the skills and the competencies that help us deliver on those fronts. Now, what I'm going to share, Andrew, if you could please. What I'm going to share with you is a list that we think at Momentum of what should be on that list of what makes a good manager. Now, I'm going to give you a few moments just to have a read of that. And some of those things we've already mentioned, and that's a great reflection on yourselves as managers. As I said, we respect there's a large amount of wealth in the room. It's not myself and Andrea and who mentioned all the answers. I think collectively as managers, you have some fantastic wealth of resources between you all. But I want you to have a read of this list that we've come up with, and just ask yourself: are there any that firstly, do you agree with them? Do they make sense? Are there any you disagree with? And again, I'd love to hear from you if there's any that you disagree with, and why? Because again, I'm not suggesting this is the definitive list. Are there any that you think are missing that need to be added? I'm just going to shut up for a few seconds. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to annotate this slide. Andrew, are we able to annotate slides?
Good question. Yeah. Sorry, I missed there. Let me just check. Let me just see if I can. Oh, I can. Look, because I'm doing it. Well, I'm doing it now, but don't forget I'm a co-host. So what I did was I went to the More button, the top, the three little white dots. I then found that I had got the, is it in reactions or is it? I managed to just get to my annotate. In fact, no, it's already there in the black bar, usually at the top. There's an annotate pen. If you click on that, you're then able to find a text box, which is what I'm now typing into. Okay. Well, all I need to do is actually, what I'd like you to do is either make a comment, a short comment, or using the annotate function, just use make a mark on one of the bullet points that you feel is particularly important for you as a manager. What you think is essential to be not a good man. Let's go. Why set up for good? Let's be great. What makes for a great manager? Why be good when you can be great, right? Conflict resolution is getting a tick, motivating others, communication, trust and integrity. Love it. Planning and prioritizing, delegation, Annie, thank you. Nice. Decision making. I'm loving the different varieties of ticks. I love that. Yeah, I am. Yeah, it's great. It's very straight ticks and very squiggly ticks. Love it. Brilliant. Yeah, love it. So influencing upwards we'll be covering tomorrow, managing from the middle. But some of these are so important, aren't they? So I mean, is there any that you disagree with? So I can see where the agreement is. Are there any that you disagree with? Any that you think are not as important?
Who's going to be brave? Anyone? I don't disagree. I think influence laterally as well is important. Okay, very good. Yeah, influencing upwards, but also influencing people around you. Just being influential. Yeah, absolutely. Being able to influence decisions, being able to influence people, outcomes, all of that is so important. Very good. Thank you. Who was that, by the way? Who wrote, I don't disagree?
That was me.
Thank you, Emma. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Nice
I'm very brave.
qualifier. It's a good qualifier on the statement.
Yeah. I like that. Are there any that you think are missing? Do we have all the important ones? I got you to call out what we did yesterday. Is there anything that we think should be added? Was that Gonza giving 3 ticks for communication?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, because you have to communicate and communicate again. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you just told them.
Shaquille, if I could join in with part of the conversation here, and I'll just get rid of my hand if I can.
Yeah, sure.
There we are. There's a particularly interesting one here, which I think is rewarding, and I would also link it or contrast it with motivating others. For this reason, the word reward as a word in the English language more often suggests a monetary reward. And yet I feel I know that in the environments in which you all live, it's not, humanitarian sector, it's not always possible to pay great wages. That's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is that as managers, we may not directly be able to influence the pay or pay grades of some of our staff. But I still think we as managers can reward people if I link it to the word of motivating others and inspiring. And we can do that in those kind of almost simplistic of ways, but such a valuable way, which is to say thank you to people and to recognize people when they've gone the extra mile or used a particular skill or stepped out of their comfort zone or whatever it might be. So that might be what I would add to this particular slide.
Nitasia, unataka ngapi? Okay, nipatie dakika microphone.
I think somebody's having a separate conversation. Yeah, thank you. So the only thing I perhaps would add, which I think is perhaps, again, going back to my experience as a manager in the aid sector and in the field of relief and development, was the fact that there was always a pressure cooker on. And when you put people in pressure cookers, you're going to get conflict. You're going to get conflict between individuals, conflict between team members, conflict with people outside of your team. So I think conflict resolution for me was a critical skill as a manager, making sure that issues were addressed and not ignored, because if you don't address the issue, it doesn't get easier later. So addressing issues, but in a way that actually would resolve the issues and actually help to mitigate against conflict escalating, because otherwise what you end up doing is not fighting poverty or the environment. You actually end up fighting each other, and it's very, very distracting and damaging to everybody involved. Okay, so thank you everyone for that. I think that was a great way to focus our attention on what makes a good manager. I'm now going to pass you on to the very capable and wonderful Andrea to take you on to the next part of the journey. Andrea, you're muted.
Thank you, Shaquille. And I've just popped out of that particular screen share so I can pop into another one for a particular reason, because I want to build on what Shaquille has just taken you through, which is then also around this notion of management versus leadership. Let me screen share again now. And if I go, there we are. Right, what you've got coming up now is a whole host of phrases down the left-hand side, which are alphabetical. As you can see, starts with accepts the status quo, administers and initiates, all the way down that column, all the way down this column, and ends with an S, short range view. You can then see that I've got two other columns, one headed management and one headed leadership. Now, many of the things here also have hints of some of the competencies. It's almost like part of the background of the competencies. And if we had time, I would get you in groups and I would get you sorting through conversation each of these items so they sit under the relevant column of either management or leadership. Now, I'll be honest, we haven't got time to do that as an activity right now, but I just wanted to share that notion with you. And I hope very much that already in your heads, you are thinking, oh, I put that one under whichever column that you would do. Because does this next slide summarize the difference between these two columns for you appropriately? Here they are. Does management concentrate on administering and imitating, focusing on systems, relies on control? Now, I'm not going to read the whole of that column out to you. You have a glance down it. Let me let you do that just for a moment or two. And indeed, you can see what I have put under the column on the right-hand side. Do they there roughly reflect what you think are the more of the behaviours, the things that we do when we are acting in a leader as opposed to a manager role? So please feel free to open your microphone and make any comment on what you see here. Do you agree with this split? Does it even matter that we should differentiate so clearly between management and leadership? Is it as neat and tidy as that? What are any of your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks so much. I'll be happy to go first.
Thank you,
thank you, Andrea. Yeah, just one of the things that resonates with me just by reading these two differences between management and the leadership. So one of the questions that I'm asking myself is, where do we find kind of personality? Because we have a lot of personality assessment. And recently I took Genius test and I was more an implementer. So I don't know if this could also influence the style of my management, or I can be a natural manager or a natural leader. I don't know, just a question.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful insight, because I'll be honest, as soon as I hear the word implementer, I am more inclined to have listed that under management than I would be under leadership. But I think it's a really relevant question. Is it as delineated? Is it as clear as two separate lists that make up management and leadership? In fact, what is the difference for you between management and leadership? Anyone else like to come in? What's the difference? Was that Gonzo? Did you see or no? Anyone like to come in? What's the difference between management?
Edson's made a comment.
Oh, thank you. I've missed it. Thank you. I lost my chat somewhere along the way. Ah, got them. Yeah, I'm back in. Can you be both? Yes. Emma, you've asked that. Edson, I'm thinking the same. Emma, I feel that you can be a manager and a leader. Yes, yeah. And I would agree. Pray to everyone. I also think management is the way out to grow a leader finally. So if you've got good basic management skills, then you could grow into being a leader. Now, I think that one of the interesting things is that within your own job titles, it could be that your job title includes the word manager or officer, which kind of puts you very distinctly in the column on the left. And yet, does that mean that you're not a leader? Well, of course you are also a leader, and you need to draw on your leadership qualities at the time when you particularly need to inspire people to step out of the routine of the day job into those change aspects of your role, or the way in which your team needs to respond to different ways of working or some change in the environment. The other thing that always strikes me about leadership is it possible for someone who is a team member and does not have the word manager or officer in their title, is it not possible for them also to be a leader? And it surely is, because it could be that a new project comes along that you actually, you use leadership skills with your team to start to inspire them to step up and deliver against this. But it could be that within your team, someone else, their characteristics lead others as well. So they're not responsible for the project, they're not held to account for it as in its entirety, but they may lead aspects of it. So I think very much the two are much grayer in between it. And I think, I'm hoping that my next slide will illustrate that. Yeah, it does. Okay. As soon as I set up an activity, and if we had had more time, I would have got you moving those items around. But with that activity, it pushes you into separating things out into management and leadership. And I actually don't think it is as neat as that at all. Look what I have here. It's a continuum. And I think if any of you work particularly visually, you might like to keep this image in your head, so that there are times when you consider this is about getting the day job done, actually using some of those straight management skills from that previous list are absolutely appropriate. But there are other times when the kind of the greeny color blurs into this purple color and you actually step more into leadership. So if I come back a slide, it could even be that some of these things you would move more over to the right hand side, and some of those you might move more over to the left hand side, depending on the circumstances that you were dealing with at any one time. So I'm just going to stop screen sharing from there for a moment, and to take us to, and let me just exit that one, just about, oh, what's going on here? I should be exiting it and I'm not. Here we are. Hopefully that's done it. Let me just go back to a different PowerPoint slide, which I can give this one. Yeah, here we go. This is where I want to go next. That one on the current slide. Okay, I'm coming back to screen share with you any moment now. Screen share. Shaquille, your hand is up, I see.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on one of those points while you're doing what you need to do, Andrea. So
Please.
again, I think the concept of leadership has perhaps shifted quite a bit. We talked about how management has shifted over the last few decades. But I think leadership has also shifted, and we've seen a lot of leaders being influential without authority, without position. So really, I'm talking about grassroots movements where, you know, we've had organizations like the Black Lives Matter movement. We've had, those, the Arab uprising, and situations where there's been leadership shown, but not one clear leader. Yeah. And again, I think that's been interesting, where leadership has been actually shared by people rather than an individual. And that's just something that, just something I noticed over the last few years as well. I've been looking at leadership and management. I'm a lecturer in leadership management as well, as I should add, at university. So I always find, any shifts in the concept of leadership and management quite interesting. And just being recognizing that actually not all leadership comes from that position of having a title, having that positional authority, being given the opportunity to, have resources and people to be responsible for. Sometimes leadership can come out of, without having that official recognition. So just to share that thought, really.
That's a really helpful observation. Thank you very much for that, Shaquille. Yeah, I'd support that entirely. So what I'm sharing with you now is that I want to encourage you, on the back of what we've just been covering around competencies into management and leadership, that you do a bit of independent reflection using the workbook, and you recognize your own strengths, weaknesses, and then the opportunities arising from that, and the threats if some of those weaknesses, areas for development, are not addressed, because that will help you with your own impact as a manager. And I think that links very nicely with, so the question, so what is the best way to manage people? And look at this image here. Now, it's an image that I rather like. So you've got these two dogs whose characters and perhaps their ages is entirely different, although I don't think this is in any way management and leadership an age question. But you've got this dog, which is much bigger, which is, you know, much more powerful, could eat this little dog for breakfast if it so chose. And so is that all about power dominating this little puppy? Or is it here that this puppy actually has lots of power because it's got the cute factor, yeah? And that cute factor means that, you know, we influence in lots and lots of different ways. So that all brings me to that, well, maybe there is not one best way to manage people. It just depends. If you think now about people in your team, some of those people, I am going to bet, are quite needy from you. They actually want you to give them quite a bit of direction. And there are others who go, no, I'm absolutely fine. I can give me the task and I can get on and do it. And this is again that hand holding or that hands-off piece, and deciding which is right and in which circumstances. So I'm going to share with you a management model and then get you going off into some breakout rooms to discuss it. It's a management model with a matrix, as many of them are, and you'll see that the horizontal axis describes the degree of direction that you as a manager need to give to your own staff members, from low on the left-hand side to high on the right-hand side. Let me just pick up my spotlight pen again. Spotlight, here we are. So low to high. If I click forward again, the vertical axis describes the degree of supportive behavior you as a manager show, from low to high. And then we begin to populate what sits in the middle, where we have, if you give a lot of directive behavior and relatively little support, that quadrant is called directing or telling. Over time, as implied by this parabolic curve, you move up and you actually just start to reduce the amount of direction you give someone and replace it with a coaching approach. And we're going to cover coaching in a little more detail in a couple of sessions on. Over time, you move again in this direction, and you're going to reduce the amount of direction you give again. You're going to keep that supportive behavior high as people grow in confidence in the tasks that they are taking on. And then finally, you move with those individuals into a position of delegating, where you can confidently give that person a task and leave them to it. Now, this comes from these two people, Hersey and Blanchard. You'll find lots of reading out there on the internet about them. And it's a model that seems, if you're visual, it's quite useful to have it in your head, to think, how do I need to behave with this person in this situation? I hope my description makes sense to you. I always, in my own head, relate this journey to when I learned to drive. Now, I can't and shouldn't assume the whole world and the room does drive, but let me just, if I may, take you through that. When I first wanted to learn to drive at 17, I thought it was going to be easy because everybody else could do it. Once I got behind the wheel of the car and my instructor was having to give me lots of direction, there was actually no room for him to give me much in the way of supporting words, because it was all instructional. But then as he saw me understand how gears work, and that I started to anticipate changing gear, I was beginning to read the road, slow down in anticipation of things. He told me to do things less, and he actually gave me more support. As I got into maybe lesson 5 or 6, he was definitely working with me from this perspective. And I will always remember the lesson before I took my test. He said, right, I'm going to tell you which turnings to take, but I'm not going to instruct you about your driving style at all. So he delegated to me the responsibility for us in that car, in that sense, totally. So I see myself having gone through that curve. Now, I think that there's another layer of complexity with this as a picture, because sometimes in the images you see in books and on the internet, there's an arrowhead which points in this direction, if you can roughly see with my cursor here, which suggests there's only one way through this. And I think it's more complicated than that, because you might be working with someone and they've just joined you, and so it feels right to start here because they may have come from another organization similar to yours, but they don't know your organization, so you have to give them quite a bit of direction. But you move quite quickly up there, and then you move on there, and then suddenly you realize, oh, that was a step too far and too quickly. And so the message I want to give you here is, don't ever be afraid to backtrack, okay? Go back a stage. That's one message. Now I'd like you to think about one person on your team, go there mentally. It could be that they already, for most things, that's how you operate with them. Perfectly good. But then some new task comes along that maybe they do not have experience of. And actually, whilst for most of the things you work with them there, for that one new thing, you actually pop back here and work with them from that perspective. And then it gets complicated again, doesn't it? Because you don't only manage one person, but you manage multiple people. And so at any one time, you might be directing with some, you might be supporting with others, you might be delegating with somebody else, and you might be coaching with somebody else again. So I think all of that, I hope, supports this notion of situational leadership. It depends on the situation. So I think I'm going to get you, go, yeah.
Andrew, before you go into groups, there's a great question in the chat.
Thank you. Lovely, Gonza, is that right? Gonza, how do you know that they're ready for the next stage? Thank you, and thank you, Shaquille, because I'd missed that. My chat box seems to keep on clicking out for some reason. Hey, I'm going to do my driving analogy, Gonza, case again for it. When my instructor started working with me from this perspective, he then noticed that I was beginning to anticipate a gear change. So even before he said change up a gear or change down a gear, he suddenly realized I had done it before he said it. So now put that into a management setting. If you notice somebody anticipates what would have been the next thing that you would have said, that would be an indication you don't need to stay there anymore so longer. You now need to go, oh, you anticipated that really well. I noticed that you did so and so. So you kind of need to try to look for those clues that tell you somebody is now almost one step ahead beyond where you are. Does that help a little bit, Gonza? Thank you. Super. Excellent. Shaquille.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Andrea, I suppose also as well, there needs to be a little sign of trust that actually, it's not that you want anybody to ever fail, but sometimes you need to just trust them to see how they get on. And if they fail, it's just coming back to the driving analogy, then as the driving instructor would do, they grab the wheel when they need to. So you step back in as a manager, especially if you know they're doing something for the first time. So it's giving them that bit of trust and giving them that message that actually, I think you're ready, and to allow them to try something new or something different by themselves, but being ready to pick up the, the balls, and to run with them.
Very nice.
if they need to. Coming back to the idea of hand holding.
Yeah, yeah. And right, and you've made me think, Shakil, of another phrase, which is this model helps you to allow people to make safe mistakes because you step back in and save them if you need to. But I think most of us need in learning to do our jobs, we need the liberty to make some safe mistakes, if that makes sense. Emma, I saw your question as well. I think it's not so much a question. I think it's a fantastic idea. You've written is it recommended to have your reports place themselves on this scale to let you know what they want from you. That has such insight, Emma, and you have made me think about, do you remember the Jane case study from yesterday? That would be a really practical way for Jane to make friends with her team by actually calling a team meeting, saying, I come with lots of skills, but you've got lots of experience. Let's look at this model. Would you like to think about where you see your setting in the day job for most of the time, so that you get a clue as a manager how to manage them well? Great stuff. Any other questions coming from that before I pop you in your groups?
Can I just add one more point, Andrea, if I may? I think as a manager, if you're spending all your time in directing, it might be necessary, but it's also going to be exhausting as a manager, because it is very much that command and control mindset where you're taking responsibility and ownership of every single activity. And if you're at the other end of the spectrum where you're delegating, it's very liberating, because it means you can now focus on the other work that you need to do, and you can trust your people to get on. So I'm not suggesting any one of these boxes is the right box. It does depend on the situation, but just be conscious of where you are. Delegating is where everybody likes to be, because it means that you're giving them the autonomy, they feel trusted. But being directing all the time means that you are going to exhaust yourself, because it's just not sustainable, especially if you have a big team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's very good point. Very good point. I see, Moisha, you've also put into the chat box, is there a scenario where you can delegate and support coach at the same time? So what I'm going to be very wicked right now and say, right, do you know what? I think that's a great question for your group work. Yeah. So I'm going to have you be ready to go into some groups. I know Anne is waiting in the wings again to send you off there. And I think we said, did we say 9 minutes, I think, didn't we, for that first group? Yeah, that's lovely. I can see your head nod. That's great. So definitely only 9 minutes. And I'd like you to consider think about Jane and where she perhaps needs to take on one of these different styles from the case study, who she might need to manage differently across her new team, and also to pick up that question that Moisha has put into the chat box. Is there a scenario where you can delegate and support or coach at the same time? I won't particularly ask you to prepare any feedback or PowerPoint slide, but I think it's practicing using this as a model, applying it to real life situations and to the Jane case study. I'm going to hand over to you right now and pop people in their groups. That looks as though everyone's in the room. Fantastic. So if you would like to pop into the chat, oh, fantastic, thank you. Some wonderful things I can see coming in already. So, yeah, wondering where a micromanager could fall onto the curve. Do you know what? Right, yeah. I will, if I were a betting person, I would bet a micromanager would tend to get stuck in directing. That's the detail. So beware that being stuck in directing for the sake of it. I'm just going to have to close my blind again because you can see the sunlight across me and I can't see you. Oh, hang on. That might work. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So that would be my response there. We've got Jane's interaction with the community liaison officer. Jane was micromanaging, directing, where she should have been supporting. Jane's supervisor delegated when Jane needed herself to have more direction. Fantastic application. Lovely. The clean energy project boss was being more directive when Jane needed more coaching and support. Fantastic observations. And I also will just briefly come back to Moishe's question before handing over to Shaquille. Is there a scenario where we can delegate and support coach at the same time? With one person, it may be that for most of their job, you can readily delegate to them because they are highly competent and confident individuals, and you are confident in them. But if there is something new that you are asking them to do, where you have the experience and knowledge that they don't, then at the same time, you might also be supporting and coaching them through that new piece until you also can delegate things to them as well. So I'm going to hand back now to Shaquille at this point. I will go to screen share for you as well. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. So we're going to be talking about remote management. At the very beginning, you very kindly shared with me where you were all from. So I'm just going to remind everybody, pardon me. So we had Emma from Washington, DC, Morgan from Madrid in Spain, Annie from Boston in USA, Frey from Washington, DC, Edson from Tanzania, Arusha in Tanzania, Mesha from Louisiana in USA, Moise from Kigali in Rwanda, Delphine from Lubumbashi from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we have Andrea from the UK. So we are literally all around the world right now. And I'm just wondering, in that context, are you, and I can tell from looking at some of your backgrounds, I'm assuming most of you are working from either an office or a home environment, is that right? Is anybody working, who's working in an office? Let me see, just in the chat, just type in office or home. Okay, office, both, okay. Home. Office. It's got a good mixture here, office and home. All right, so it can be, we've already said how challenging it is to be a manager. And I think when we add in the dimension of remote management, working remotely, it makes that challenge, I don't want to say it makes it more challenging because it does make the challenge different. And there's different challenges, there's advantages, disadvantages that come out of working remotely. But working remotely is not something that's unique to our sector. So it's actually something I think, the rest of the world, I think, caught up with us, especially during the pandemic. But working remotely has been something that has been, the case for people in our sector, especially for decades. When I was I had a team which was actually based in Birmingham in the UK. I had part of my team in London. I had another part of my team in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, and also people within America and parts of Europe. And what I had on the one hand, I had a very good manager, I think I mentioned this, very supportive. But the one thing that I had a gripe over was this manager insisted that I come into the office to have, then it was Skype meetings long before Zoom and Teams became the norm, to have Skype meetings with my team who were all around different parts of the world because he wanted to see me physically in the office. And I never made any sense to me. He was very much bums in seats kind of person. It never made any sense to me because coming into the office to have a Skype conversation with somebody who's in a different part of the world never made any sense to me whatsoever. So for those of you who work remotely, and for those especially who are working in the in your home environments, but also I suppose in the office environment, that's where you are. Where's your team? The same question to you about your teams now. Where are your teams? Are they in the office with you, or are they remote and working separate from where you are? So again, in the chat, just flip remote. Okay, thank you, Annie. Literally all over the world remote. Thank you, Emma. My team all over the world remote. Yeah, Delphine, my team's remote. Marisha, remote and working separately from where I am. Yeah, remote all over the US, Latin America. Thank you, Morgan. Working in different time zones. Yeah. We were talking about that during the break, myself and Andrew were. So everybody. So literally, I think everybody has their teams working remotely. So already I know you will know how, I suppose someone in Thailand, 12-hour time difference. Wow, Emma, you had check-ins at 6 a.m. your time. Oh, I feel for you, Emma. I feel for you. So does that mean you start your day early and you stay up and then you carry on and finish early, or does that day just be blurring to the next? How does that work, Emma? In
theory, but it's hard to log off early sometimes.
Yeah. Once you're up, you're up.
Yep.
I remember once having a team meeting, remote team meeting, where I had to join a meeting in Australia and being up at 2 o'clock in the middle of the night because that's the time they were available. And I was like, there's got to be an easy way to do what I do, right? So the sector has been working like this for a long time, and it's not, as I said, new to us. The pandemic might let everybody catch up. But on a scale of 10 now, what I'd like to ask you to do in the chat is give me your thoughts on how you feel about that. I've told you my thoughts. I think there's some great things about working remotely. I get to meet wonderful people like you now that if I was working in a face-to-face environment, this wouldn't happen, not really. I might be doing training with other people, but it wouldn't be with your good selves. So there's definitely some upsides to it. But as we heard from Emma, there's some downsides to it as well. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about it? 1 being you hate it, 10 you absolutely love it. You could do this day in, day out, every day of your life, the rest of your life. Where do you feel about it? So in the chat again, give me a number. And nobody go for 5. Don't sit on the fence. Give me a solid decision. 10, 8, 7, 10. Wow. Got some 10s coming up. This is nice. 10 again. 9. These are high scores. Wow. 9. Is that everyone? So we've got some really high scores there. Wow. So I'm just curious very quickly, what's so great about working remotely? Give me one word. Okay, Andrew said works with different people and different cultures, gives rich insight. Yes, it does. So in one word in the chat again, just tell me flexibility, yeah. Work-life balance, absolutely. Flexibility. And it's interesting, isn't it? We're talking flexibility again. It's interesting. We were talking earlier about rewards. What we're seeing as a practice in the world of work is that increasingly flexibility is becoming the one thing that people are demanding from their employers more than anything else. Not the pay package, not the other benefits, flexibility. So it's really interesting to see that tallies with what I'm seeing in the chat. Okay. So I suppose the question I'd like to ask you now is, what do your staff need from you now that is different from before? That's the question I really want to delve into, because it's very clear that remote working has a lot of benefits, because you're restricted by your geography. There's no travel involved. You can work across cultures, across countries, but it does mean that as a manager, you do have to think differently about your team and what you need from them now compared to what you would have needed from them you know, perhaps 10, 20 years ago. Oh, have I lost you guys?
No.
No, you're still there.
No.
No, sorry, I clicked on a button without realizing, and I went to a different screen.
It's all right, you're all right.
I thought I lost everybody then. I was going to say on the downsides of working remotely, technology. So what I'd like you to do now, I'm going to ask Anne to put you into groups, but I want to share a document with you. So
Do you want me to
Anne,
do
are you able
that
to
for
share
you?
that Google document?
Yeah, I can indeed. Let me just come out and go in again. Hang on a minute.
So whilst Andrea is doing that for me, I'll explain to you what I need you to do in the next piece of work that I'm asking you to do.
Right.
So there's, thank you, Andrea. So what you've got here, this is on the Google link, which is part of where you would have found the Zoom invite. That's where you'll find this particular document. And it's around remote competencies. We've been speaking about competencies that a manager needs, but these are around remote competencies. I'm going to get you to focus your attention on page 5, if I may. And what you've got is 3 different competencies that we'd like to focus on. One is around working digitally, so with technology. One is around, yeah, on page 5, you can see that. One is on page 9, which is around meeting deliverables. And then finally, on page 12, is around communication and culture. So in your 3 groups, I'd like to have a read about each of the 3 areas. So each group will have one of these areas. So whether it's around digital, whether it's around deliverable, whether it's around communication and culture, what you'll see is that we've identified some competencies that we feel are important for being effective in communication and managing culture. So here, I mentioned earlier conflict resolution. So that's listed down there as a competency that would help in terms of communication, making sure that you manage conflict better. Now, what I'd like you to do as a group, if that's the group that you're in, what I'd like you to think about is, what does that mean in a remote situation? How does that become problematic? How does that become easier? Does it become easier? Are you more likely to have more conflicts be working remotely? Are you more likely to have less conflicts working remotely? Which is it? Are there more misunderstandings, more miscommunication? And then I'd also like to think about, if that's the problem, what's the solution? What are the habits that you could introduce as a manager to your team to ensure that actually there's less conflict? There's, you know, and if the conflict does arise, how it can get resolved easier. So here I'll give you an example. One way to perhaps manage a good habit around conflict is actually making sure there's clarity and understanding of where one person's role begins, another person's role ends. So there's not, you know, nobody stepping on each other's shoes and need, you know, without, you know, wanting to. And that's much easier to do when they're working in the room, in the same room, and you can see the physical boundaries. But when you're working remotely, perhaps that's a bit more blurred. Perhaps if the communication isn't clear around the roles and responsibilities, that you're going to more likely to get conflict. So perhaps checking in would be a good habit. When you give out a piece of work, checking in with the person. Are there any issues that you need to discuss? Making time in your meetings to talk about any, you know, possible conflicts that are arising. So again, there's no right or wrong answers. They're all based on your own experience about what you feel that competency looks like in the context of remote working, and what additional challenges that might be there, and what you could do as a manager. So I'm hoping everybody's able to access the document.
If it helps, Shaquille, I can see people stepping into the room now by some of these symbols above. So you're stepping in, which is great. And as Shaquille was talking, I hope I was demonstrating the pages that you need to look at. You'll only look at one page each and look at your group title. And then I gave an illustration of what Shaquille was talking about and typed in.
Okay. So we've got 10 minutes for this exercise. So there's not a lot of time. So again, we're not expecting you to fill this, all, as I said, any or all the boxes. Just pick one. Pick one from each of the areas, whether it's around digital competency, deliverable competencies, or communication and culture competencies. Pick one. Have a discussion about it and get something into the workbooks. Is that okay, everybody? And it's time for you to step in and perform your magic.
Yeah, there's 3 rooms, and each room is either digital proficiency, meeting deliverables, or communication culture. So just take a look at that when you go into your room, and that's the topic that you will be. Okay, I'm going to enter you guys into your rooms now.
Perfect.
What's interesting,
Do you want to
Andrea,
pause,
do a lot
do you want
of
to pause record, Anne?
okay, everybody, welcome back.
We've
I
not
think
got everybody
everyone.
back yet, Shaquille. We're
No, not
still
everybody. Oh, yeah, sorry, 7
part
seconds.
2
Yeah,
groups out, so just, yeah,
yeah, sorry. Thank you.
no problem.
So I think we've got everybody
Yeah,
back now. Is that
back
right?
now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So welcome back, everybody. I'm hoping that was a useful exercise for you to do and to think about. And what I've asked Andrew very kindly to do is to share her screen so we can see what you were able to come up with. So I'd like to ask somebody from the digital proficiency group just to talk me through what they came up with on slide 5, is it?
In fact, they were in slides. They were working in slide 7. Digital
Okay, slide 7. Thank you.
I'm just seeing if I can make it any larger for you. I'm not sure I can, but you are looking at the right slide.
Yeah, I can just about read it. So who's in digital proficiency? Who'd like to talk me through what
I
you
wrote
came up
it,
with?
but I can nominate maybe Ngoza. Would you mind sharing out loud what we discussed?
He's nominating somebody else. I love that.
I am delegating already.
Delegating, exactly.
In that case, I would like to support Edson in this.
Go ahead, Gonza. Brilliant.
Yeah, well, we did talk about one procedure in communicating, and it's so much worked out that we are all coming from different African nations. Communication in Africa tends to be a little bit different from the Western world, where we value more the physical part. Not that you don't value it in the Western part, but we want to talk to each other when we are looking at each other, even touching or something like that. We even notice that something like that could even happen when we are sending emails. Someone comes following it, one or another. But the thing is, we need to create the habit of patience. The internet may not be working so very well, so we need to understand the people where they are and try to, be with them in that situation as they as we lead them. That is practicing patience and the ways that we can look at the competence and in our context is the technical proficiency that is needed to adapt to these digital platforms for the communications.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gonza. And what a great insight. Thinking about the different and impact of culture can make such a difference in how you manage people, definitely. So I saw a comment there, is page 12.
Yeah, hang on.
So if you can go to page 12 for me, please, thank you.
You should find me there.
So, so I'm just a bit confused. Are we saying that the, let's read the comments.
I think there's a little, bit of miscommunication. I think our team did the digital proficiency. This one looks to be
Right.
communication and culture.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's all right.
It
It's
is,
exactly
yeah.
what we're talking about, communication,
Yeah.
why it's so important to
Yeah.
emphasize what you're.
Do you want me to go back to the digital proficiency one?
No, I think that what they're saying is the digital proficiency team covered culture, communication,
No.
culture.
No.
We did it.
No?
We did digital. I think there was just some miscommunication in the communication and culture team spoke, but we did the
Right.
digital.
Okay. So Marisha, do you want to talk about digital proficiency then? Thank you.
Yeah, I can take it, or Morgan would argue. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, you can, if you want to, you can do it.
Yeah, so, and just feel free to chime in. So we talked about sort of the decorum, the difference in having meetings virtually as opposed to in person. So there are a lot of communications at all of our organizations, it seems, with figuring out, whether or not cameras are going to be required, whether they will be on or off, how is it that you get the team's attention via remote work as opposed to if you all were in the office together. Also a requirement for proficiency in using call features, specifically if you are working in different areas across the US, whether or not a translator might be needed, whether or not, internet capabilities will allow for on-camera communications. And the habit that we discussed here was just communicating expectations at the onset and ensuring that that all team members are aware of what the expectations are and are comfortable communicating if there are issues or errors. We also, for the second point, now I'm on the wrong. For discussing digital tools, we talked about ensuring, especially in hiring in a remote environment, whether or not Zoom, ensuring that the candidate is comfortable with Zoom or with Teams or Outlook or some of those tools that you sort of utilize on a day-to-day basis, ensuring that in the interview process that you're asking those questions to ensure that they're comfortable with that. And then lastly, for the processes, we talked about standard operating procedures, approval chains with regards to invoices and signatures and those sorts of things. And then the habit there was just ensuring that folks are in communication with IT, have proper trainings, et cetera. And then anyone from my group can chime in on anything I've missed.
No, I think that's a brilliant summary. Thank you, Marisha. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm just going to go to the last group, if that's all right, your group, who had deliverables, meeting deliverables.
Yeah, which is there. Let me make it a little bit smaller.
So who's going to speak for that team? I think just take me through the one, just again, just conscious of time. I'll ask everyone else to read what's on the screen as well. So building new relationships, I think it's a fantastic one. So go ahead. Who'd like to talk to me through that one?
Frey or Moise, do you want to do it or should I do it?
Please do it,
I think
Demo. Thank
okay.
you.
All right. So building new relationships, we said that in a remote context, this can take longer and requires like a more intentional effort. Meeting with your supervisors or coworkers in person less frequently, so we don't have a strong sense of who they are outside of work. Even though we might work well together, we just don't know, their personal, anything about their personal lives, which some people prefer and some people prefer less. An important thing we discussed is different time zones and different cultural backgrounds can make building new relationships challenging. And then after you meet your supervisor in person, communication can become easier. So those are some of the things we noted, which are different. The habits are, I shared a personal anecdote of how I didn't know when the holidays for a different country were, and I ended up scheduling a call on a holiday inadvertently, and people joined because of the power
They-
dynamic.
Oh,
So now I make sure I know when the holidays are, understanding how comfortable people are with video cameras on, depending on the time of day.
yeah.
Being flexible, there might be a need to reschedule meetings, and this can impact a deliverable schedule. So being flexible, empathetic, and realistic in your deliverable timelines. And being empathetic to connectivity issues as well.
Fantastic, Emma. Brilliant. So I'm going to close it there if that's all right. And thank you so much for fantastic analysis there and some real, positive habits that I think can help address some of those issues. Andrew, I'm going to pass over to you and let you hit the floor running.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for that. Some really valuable insights. And I'm not going to screen share now in the last 2 minutes. But I'm going to set you a task really to go away and do and think about, which would build absolutely on everything we've done about competencies, management and leadership, and the situational leadership and remote working. And that is, what is it to be an inclusive manager? So think about that as a question. What is it to be an inclusive manager? So if either Shaquille or Anne could quickly type that into the chat box so people can see it, that would be helpful. What is it to be an inclusive manager? The second thing I would like you to do is go out onto the internet and look up a YouTube video call by Accenture. So it's the company Accenture, Accenture. Shaquille, if you'd pop that in for me or somebody, yeah. Accenture. And you're looking for a short video which is entitled Inclusion Starts with I. It's quite a short video, possibly about 6-ish minutes. I'd like you to take a look at it and come back to the session tomorrow with any of the insights and aha moments that landed for you about being an inclusive manager. Okay, that's all I'd ask of you. And that way, I've managed to finish exactly on time at 1/2 the hour. Thank you all so much for your time today. Some fantastic input and insights. I'm really enjoying being with you all so much. Some wonderful things. See you tomorrow. Look, have a think about that question. Look at that video. See you then. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Do you want to click the stop recording, Anne?